And basically, what this movie's about is about the 1969 moon landing. And it's kind of like this kid's imaginary take on him being a part of the Apollo space program, even though he wasn't actually part of it, but he was involved like in his life so much around uh like his neighborhood, his father uh worked for NASA. Pretty much everybody that he knew was involved in working for NASA, or they had family working for NASA, or they did something around, NASA in Houston at that time. Um, and that's basically all this movie is. Like the first like 40 minutes is basically just a summary of what his neighborhood is like. Like you get introduced to, because in his mind, and it's never made clear if this was in his mind or not. I mean, it's to me, it's obvious that it's not real, but in his mind, he gets recruited by NASA because he wants to be part of like everything going on. It made the lunar module too small, so they have to send somebody up there to test it before they actually send it out, which is a ridiculous concept, but it's really, but they play it like completely straight face and it works. I love it.
You make good
Um,
grades in math? You always make 100?
no,
No, that's
I was
how.
making-
That's how it happened.
that's how that happened. And that's the line, like that, yeah. And then pretty much that's the only introduction you get. And then it's like almost an hour of just him going through this his life in Houston in Texas in the 1960s. And I loved this movie. This movie was so awesome. Um Part of it is that I'm from Texas, and so a lot of stuff that I did, Joseph is like having a
Sorry.
freak out
Don't
right
fall
now.
over, Joseph.
Um But a lot of the stuff that I did when I was a kid, this guy also did, because my parents grew up in this time period, and so they pass a lot of these, not traditions, but just like things that they did down to me. Like one of the biggest things was oh gosh, it's not even a Texas thing; it's just a childhood thing. But eating the Frito chili pie right out of the bag, that was so awesome. I loved, because I used to do that at ballpark games. You used to be able to do that, and they used to give you snow cones if you picked up trash. And I knew kids that would go to trash cans and like pick up trash. I'm like, you can't do that. That's not fair. My dad's like, don't be a snitch. Just pick up the trash. So that is just, I really loved this movie. The dad was awesome, even though it, like his dad is part of NASA, but he doesn't have an important job there exactly. But he's part of the cog that keeps it moving. He's part of shipping and receiving. So if he's not there, then NASA doesn't get anything. So he is vitally important. He's just not important enough to be on the news. And so
I love that
uh,
line when he's in the armchair and he's like going through, oh, it came from this,
Yeah.
had transfer here.
Oh
And
yeah.
he's like, oh, so that's all you? And he's like, I don't know what you call shipping and receiving, but yeah, that's it.
yeah,
like-
that would be me.
And he's like, but no, Kyle in Florida does most of that. Like, he oversees all that.
But yeah, I love the dynamic between the family and like the kid. What's funny is that the kid almost doesn't talk a lot in this movie. He just kind of like acts, and Jack Black narrates over everything, but it really works. It's almost like a Christmas Story almost.
Wonder
I
Years.
mean, Wonder Years, yeah. Um it just, this movie was just so, and there was no need for it to be in this like what do you call it? So the cell
Rotoscope
shading.
style.
Scope.
Yeah, rotoscope, whatever. There was no need for it, but it worked. Everything worked with this.
Yeah, I think it worked perfectly for this. Just the way
It really did. Like especially during the broadcasts of the old timey stuff,
Mhm.
like the show, and that's the thing. The shows too. I used to watch TV Land because we weren't really allowed to watch a lot of modern stuff because my mom and dad didn't like a lot of modern cartoons. We still watched them, but what we watched with my mom and dad were like Gilligan's Island, Mr. Ed, that kind of stuff. And I love seeing that. Like we watched Lucille Ball. Um, it's just in the Twilight Zone. But man, this was just such a good movie. I'm trying to think of more I can say on it just while I'm here. I'm going to chime in, of course, because that's what we do. But uh, this is probably one of my favorite of his movies. And I love like A Scanner Darkly. Slacker's pretty good for being like his first movie. What was that movie with Steve Carell? Do you remember? And Lawrence Fishburne and pretty sure it was Bryan Cranston. They played like retired Marines and they were
Oh,
transporting.
Oh
um,
yeah,
is Flag in the name?
yeah, something like that. What was
Something
that
like
called?
that, yeah. It did. That one doesn't seem like a Richard Linklater film at all.
He has
Um,
a very like drastic variety of films.
Yeah.
Huh.
Well, that's the thing. Like Licorice Pizza seemed more like a Richard Linklater film than a Paul W.S. Anderson movie. Like, and I haven't seen Licorice Pizza at all, but for me, this movie, I think, did a really good job of trying to communicate like that time period and that feeling of nostalgia really well. Like even like the Red Rover one, I loved that scene. It was like, oh yeah, we just like played this
Oh
once and somebody
yeah,
got hurt, then we moved on, and it was just I
I
just
love
loved
that
everything.
game.
I did too, and the
I
thing
was
is,
like,
like, I
why did
remember.
they take this out of school? But that like this scene explains
Well,
it.
I remember like a kid getting like his elbow like dislocated, like like the bone didn't pop out like in this one, but I remember like one kid just like hit him too hard and his elbow got dislocated.
I've never played
Last
that
flag,
game.
Last Flag Flying was what that movie was called.
Yeah, Last Flag Flying. That's right. Okay.
Last time, like, thank you. But yeah, this movie was great. Zachary Levi was really good. Just as
Yeah.
like a very
Yeah.
like it was almost underplayed character too, because he's only in like certain shots, and when they're going back from the real perspective and the make believe perspective, uh, yeah, this movie was really good. Oh, and small detail, just because Sonic and I didn't get to see Sonic, the dad is actually the voice actor for multiple of the Knuckle characters in video games.
Huh.
So
Interesting. Good job, Dad. Strange connection.
very odd, right? Um, So that's me. Let's go to Joe, actually.
So, movie Robert Duvall played Watson in was called The 7% Solution. It's from 1976. It was Oscar nominated and has Laurence Olivier as Moriarty. So,
Wow.
as for this movie, I thought I really liked it too. It was a real fun watch. When I watched it at night. Like Thomas saying, the first like half of the movie is just not even more than half. I would say is just like a history lesson, basically of '60s Texas and the space age and stuff like that. And for me, the '60s America is kind of overrated. It's one of the time periods I don't really like. But this
Hippies,
one,
man.
yeah, but this one it's a little more digestible because it's like a kid growing up, and like Thomas says, all these shows that you watch on like Nick at Night and stuff, or like the shows they're watching and stuff like that. And I think Jack Black did a really good job narrating this film. Like his voice, he shows a lot of enthusiasm, but it's also like kind of held back from what
For
his like
sure.
crazier roles are and stuff like that. Um,
Like
so
really informative. Like you couldn't stop listening to him. Like, yeah,
yeah.
just keep explaining this. This is really interesting.
As for the other parts, I think it's like pretty like a deep movie actually because it's this kid and he's like disappointed almost in his father for having kind of a boring job at NASA. So he comes up with this fantasy of going to the moon, but no one gets to know about it. And I think that's kind of like reflective of how he views his dad. Is like his dad is like important to NASA, but no one is ever going to know about it. The history books are never going to know about it. So I think that's why he like kind of makes up this fantasy in his mind of about how he feels about his dad. So I thought that was really cool. And this movie just has like a lot of charm and a lot of fun stuff. Like all the baseball stuff I love. I'd like to point out that I actually brought the game of pickle to my middle school when I was growing up. So, so that was fun seeing them play that and stuff. And going, I liked when they went to the movies and they showed like those real old B movies. That was cool. And then like all the brands, you get to see how all the brands were back then. Like Squirt was like into the space age and stuff like that. That was so cool. And Yeah, it's just like a big nostalgia trip for like someone like me who didn't even grow up in the '60s, but just like all this stuff gets passed down to you from your parents and stuff like that. And the music. I read these articles every week about like number one hits, and a lot of these '60s hits that they play were like number ones. Like even that Archie song was a number one song. So it was nice to like hear them in context and stuff like that. So that was like super cool. So, and then like I said, I think the rotoscope, like it's always seemed like a gimmick before. Like even in the Scanner Darkly, you're like, why does that movie kind of need that? But in this one, it just like works perfectly because it's like it's a period piece, and then it has like the sci-fi aspect to it, like all the like dream stuff. Like it just like fit it perfectly for this movie. So I will throw it to Michael and see what he says again.
Yeah, I completely agree with you guys. This movie is absolutely delightful. The only thing that I would say, the only knock I had against it was actually kind of changed by your opinions, because in my opinion, it didn't really seem like the movie made it out to be a fantasy of his at all.
Yeah, I was curious
Yeah.
about that, but at the end, I kind of thought that it was his imagination.
Like
but yeah, sorry.
that's what I would say. Like, because for me, I was like, with how it was set in my mind, is I never caught that they were saying it was a fantasy, so I felt like it didn't belong because the whole movie wasn't even about that. Like even whenever it went to that, it was like, oh yeah, and he went to space, and then and they go back to just like this slice of life, and like I feel like it's such a good, like I was describing it in my head, was like it's a slice of life of like simple life, but with in such extraordinary times, like going to the moon, building all this crazy stuff, but it's just like this simple family watching their, and it's such a weird. It reminds me a lot because I've been listening to I told Thomas and Jared and Alex this. I was listening to Hail Mary Project by oh gosh,
Peter Weir.
Andy Weir. There you go. Who did
Andy
The
Weir.
Martian and
Peter Weir directed. Oh, I'm an idiot. Director.
but it reminded me a lot of just like how he writes, which I really enjoy. It's that kind of like first person, just kind of like describing everything in a really well done way of just like you're very enthralled in everything he's talking about. Like those The Martian and Hail Mary Project are nothing but science, and like I'm so into it. Like it's just talking about math and stuff, and what this blends with that. Normally, that's like, oh, if a professor was talking about this, I'd be like, okay, seriously, just trying to be emphatic at one point. But it's so well written, and I feel like this movie does it very much the same way of like. There's reminding me so much of that, which if you haven't listened to either of those books, I finished Hail Mary Project in 2 days because it was freaking amazing. Anyway, yeah, this movie is so well done and just kind of capturing that like time frame and everything, just like growing up as a kid. Like all I kept thinking, yeah, Thomas.
What you were saying about like someone like regurgitating like facts or whatever. I mean, you could do that, and it has been done like forever with this time period about, yeah, this is what it was like in like the 60s or NASA or whatever. But with this one, or with this perspective of like of Stanley, it's more of a personal experience of what it was like growing up around it and what it
Yeah.
was to be like experiencing it, instead of just like, well, in 1969, Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin went to the moon. But this is what it was like, was to experience like we're landing on the moon. And even like they kind of touched on is like the civil unrest of people like asking about like, well, why aren't we spending this
Yeah.
much money on going to the
Yeah,
moon when we can be investing it? And his dad's like, are you kidding? We're going to the freaking moon.
Yeah.
Like this is like no one has ever done this before. And
Yeah.
so
I like that because you don't see that a lot when they talk about the space race and stuff like that. That there was people that actually were
Yeah.
like, "Hey, let's not spend all our money on this." And so that was cool. And I also like how like the kids didn't, even though this big stuff was happening around them, sometimes they didn't even like know about it. Like they talk about the civil rights movement and stuff, and like one of the kids like, is that true, Dad? Did they do that to black students and stuff like that? So I think that was really cool, is like how relatable they made it to people.
Yeah, I think you put it really well, Thomas. It's such a personal point of view of this kind of like storytelling, and giving like a history lesson from like that personal point of view is really enticing and keeps you very entertained. And the way he's like, they go over, like you guys said, the favorite shows and everything, the favorite bands, and one of our favorite scenes is very simple. But whenever the sister like listens to her favorite song, then goes and replays it and sits back down, they're like, all right, you get that's the last one, then we're moving on. It's like, it was just so relatable, but so foreign, because it's not like you press skip back or you hit repeat. She has to go back and move the needle back. I was like, such a very enjoyable like different aspect of what something simple we would do now, but they have to get up and go move to do it. I don't know. I found that very charming.
Well, and the
but
fact that it's still like that childhood behavior of like a kid wants to listen to their favorite song
Yeah,
over
over
again.
and
So
over.
the mom
Yeah.
puts it on repeat in the CD player. Well, in this case, the kid has to actively go
Yeah.
and put it on repeat. It's still on repeat, but just different. So,
But it even kind of shows like how it's kind of cool how music was consumed differently back then. I heard someone, I think it was literally the vocalist for the Dead Horse Prada, say one time that he likes records because you have to be present
Yeah.
because it's gonna stop soon and you have to flip the record over or whatever. And it's just funny, like watching this movie and they're all sitting on the couch, like they are in that room for the purpose of listening to this
Yeah.
music, and like nobody does
Yeah.
that anymore. Like you listen to music while you do something else, and I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, it's so different because it's like something like it's like a television stationer. You can't pick up the record and walk down the street with
Yeah.
it or something like that. Like they're just all have to be, like you said, present and actually listening to it. It's a very different aspect of something that will like. I think the last time I sat down, I think the 21 Pilots album Trench was the last time I just sat on a couch and I was like, I'm just gonna listen to this album, see what it's like. That's the only time I've done that in like what, that was 2-3 years ago. But yeah, it's such a charming movie, and I love the way they bring about everything going. And I'm trying to, oh yeah, I was gonna bring up the one of the ones a lot because a lot of it different times, different periods. So I enjoy seeing it through that aspect of what you would do as a kid. But like one that I related to a lot was the going to the drive-in one, and like we would go drive-in with Corey and we go wander around and do random stuff. And they're like talk about trying to find people kissing, so you look for the brakes in the car. I was like, it's such a well told, just like personal experiences and quirkiness of life and everything, and just like it's like the highlights of life just bundled in this one thing. It also does a good job at purveying is the word I want to use. I don't know if that word works there, but this just like how they're just in it, like they don't realize what's happening. They don't like all the kid, like the dad's like this is happening. We have to watch this. The mom's like, let him go to sleep. Like they're like, okay, I'm gonna go to bed,
Yeah.
whatever. But like to all the kids, they're like, oh, this is just our life. This is what's happening. It's so normal. But for like me watching, I'm like, oh, I wish I was there. I wish I could have like watched this on TV live. It'd be amazing. But these kids are like,
well, even like his
they're
dad says
falling
at the
asleep.
very end.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Did he even catch it? It's like I want him to know, or want him to tell his grandkids he watched the moon landing.
Yeah.
He's like, well, if he doesn't, he thinks he did. I'm like,
Yeah.
that's okay.
Yeah.
memory. He's like, memory works weird. Like he'll think he
Yeah.
did, and then like just the things of like them.
Exactly. Like, what people would say.
Yeah.
Yep.
And like whenever the teacher would just bring in the TV and they'd watch the newscast, things like that. Like it's such an interesting time of just us like from a living point of view. Because like whenever there's things like that, like war or like wars or anything like that. Was it this movie they were talking about that? Where they were talking about, gosh, what was I watching? Was it this one where they were talking about bombing and then that might not have been this movie. I can't remember. Anyway, I was thinking of I don't know if it was a movie or anyway, I was watching something they were talking about bombing. Maybe I was watching We Crash. Maybe they're talking about that. Anyway, they're talking about like living in London whenever like the bombs are going off and you just live and you're like, oh, the bomb just blew up that building, but that's just a normal part of the day. Like they were talking about events like this being normal in that sense, and I don't think it was part of this movie. Anyway, my apologies for that tangent.
That's part of Project Hail Mary, Michael.
Is it?
Yeah,
I've
it's talking
consumed
about,
a
like,
lot of
about the
stories in the past
About
week.
the astrophage and how it's just like part of life. It's like, oh, it's
Yeah, okay.
doing.
Man.
Yeah.
All
That's
blending
what-
in.
I just went part of that part of that book. I'm like,
Okay.
I know exactly
Good.
what you're talking about, but
Yeah.
that's not a movie yet.
I've listened to like 3 books in the past week. I've watched a show and then now the movies we were supposed to watch. I've had a lot of stories going around here. Anyway, I'll skip to the end here. I love this movie. It's very charming, very wonderful. Love the whole life aspect of it. Like I said, characters are great. I did like one more thing I'll add that you guys were talking about, the whole political aspect and how that daughter was the mid-generation gap, the one they talked about, and she was like, oh, like you can tell she was kind of against it, and then you could also see her like light up whenever they land on the moon. She has that small smile. I thought it was a good way of showing and not telling and not preaching to you in senses like, hey, this is important, but this is also important. And I don't know, I loved it. It was very, very well paced movie. I enjoyed it. I'll throw it to Jared. I feel like I never throw it to Jared. Go ahead, Jared.
All right. Don't really have much to say about this movie. I thought it was very cute, and I did enjoy it quite a bit. I could listen to Jack Black talk about things forever. What it brought up feelings though is like I think only Thomas and Joseph would get this. On VH1, they used to do I Love the like 80s and 90s. And
Yeah.
it reminded me of that, and I used to love that show because you'd see all like just what was going on in that time period, and you got a little taste of it. and that's what this movie brought to me, and I really liked it. Um, it's very relatable, like all the family stuff, like you guys were mentioning. I like how one of my favorite parts was when they go to the Baskin Robbins, and the brother's like, or she's like, "What flavor do you want?" And he's like, "You know what flavor I want?" And they're like, "Vanilla."
She played that so
Yes.
well.
Yes.
How she paced her lines right there was
Yep.
I can't even remember exactly what she said, but I was like, that was the like Oscar worthy scene right there of how perfectly it was just like that's exactly how it would be and how it should be. Is I can't remember
Yeah.
what line she said, but man, I
Just
just
like
was
the
thinking the
pure
whole time. I was like,
sibling
oh
snark.
my god, it was
Ye-
good.
Yeah, I totally agree. When I saw that line, I was just like, "Oh my gosh!" Like Thomas said, it's just sibling snark. It's just like she's just like kind of like you're talking about, like showing, not telling, but it's almost like she's saying without saying. Where she's like, "Yeah, you're gonna do that again?" Like it's totally saying like you're stupid for not trying other flavors.
Because yeah, she said something. She's like, "Oh, we got
okay.
26 other flavors, but you always pick vanilla or something like that." And just like how she
Yeah.
presents it was
She did that
so
really
well.
well done.
We got all these flavors, and you get vanilla. But and I like the dad. I like when he's like, "Dad, is it all right if we take this plywood?" And he's like, "Well, the way I see it is they overcharged us for the house."
That was
I was
so
like,
They
man,
owe
that-
us, actually.
I was like, man, that's great. It's just like super cute movie. You can relate to it so much. That scene with the Red Rover really did shock me. I was like, good lord, his bone is just sticking out. But no, it's like what I mentioned. It's like I love the '70s or whatever, and then like the Wonder Years. How Thomas mentioned, like the kid is just acting, but then there's like a narrator who's actually saying what he's thinking. And I just went through all of Wonder Years, and that's pretty much what it was like. Oh, Joseph, I think you're the only one that will get this. The dad, you know what Knuckles he voiced?
Which one?
The OVA movie.
Jeez.
Just if you know, then you know. But yeah, I really did like this movie. The only knock I would have against this movie is I don't think I'd ever watch it again. But I really enjoyed the one watch I did do. Go ahead, Alex.
All right. I was dreading watching this. I saw the trailer and I liked Scanner Darkly and I like that style, but for some reason the trailer, like I feel like they showed all the scenes that looked the worst. Because like throughout watching this movie, I was like, some of this looks amazing. Like there's that one of the shots where they're like driving down the street and the view is of the street while they're driving it. I was like, this looks astonishing. And there's another scene where she like is stirring her food on the table and like the lighting. I'm like, this looks great. What's up, Jared?
Sorry, I forgot about a line that I really liked. Is when it was the guys like the dad and a few of the brothers driving in it's like the difference between a hillbilly and a redneck.
Oh yeah,
That was great.
that whole scene was like when he puts the he like drinking a beer and he puts the tab
In the beer.
Make a wish.
That's that whole like anecdote about how I think about six
died.
people have died a year for choking on those.
I just like the dad. He's like, or the kid's like, so we're rednecks. He's like, no, because you're gonna pick up that can when we get home.
That scene is so brilliant. There's so many facets to it where it's like Michael said, like about the line about choking, like that's such a little kid's thought process of like worrying constantly that your dad's gonna choke about. Anyway, and then like and the dad is basically doing this, but trying to make excuses for doing this. Be like, oh, but no, we're not like those people. I just want to throw this on the floor with my vehicle, but I have to explain why I'm not these trashy people. Anyway, it was so good. Anyway, but I was dreading watching this. I was just like, I don't care about this. Like the style from the trailer, I was like, I don't want to watch this. And almost immediately, I was like, yeah, I was wrong. I was super sucked in. I think that all the space stuff is awesome, and like Michael's talking about, it really kind of puts your mind to be like, what would it have been like to have been alive during that time? And but that being said, I loved all that stuff, but I was absolutely, could have had a whole movie of just him talking about how life was, and like I know it's such a cliche thing for older people to say, like, oh, kids, they grow up all crappy today. But like, I think back on like when we were kids, we were like, in my opinion, like we were like the last of the all kids are outdoors and playing every day out in the backyard and all that kind of stuff. What's up, Thomas?
So, okay, the fact that you said I was going to chime in and say this, something that really cracked me up was like, yeah, we would just like hop into our friend's truck and just go to the beach. I didn't even think about it. We were going 90 miles an hour, and there were 8 of us in the back seat. It's like one roll, and we're all dead. What do you think about that? The thing is, I did that kind of stuff though when I was a kid. Like, oh yeah, you can't fit in the back seat. Just hop in the back, you'll be fine.
Yeah.
And it was complete trust on your part on the adult, and the fact that he says that too is like, I remember that being the last part of my years when I'd fall asleep in the car and I'd wake up in my own bed.
Yeah.
I'm like, but
And
Oh,
the
with
weird.
that, when they smuggle in like 2 kids into the
yeah,
He's like, it'll be $6. Yeah, it will be. He
Yeah.
drives off.
That's so
well,
good.
just that and like just obviously like things are like dangerous, but we didn't care. Like the one that got me too was like when it's like, oh yeah, we went to this pool that was over chlorinated, and
Yeah.
like he's like pops up and like his eyes are like this big and they're like red. He's like, ah.
Oh,
And
and
they
then
would
they're
also-
also pesticide.
Yeah.
Just stuff like that. Like nowadays, you'd be like, oh my god, they're doing it. And like nowadays, it's like, or when we were kids, it's like, he's not dead yet. So I mean,
But even so, like this kind of reminds me of like, here, listen, all I could think throughout this whole movie is the stories my dad has told me, because like because like we grew up more like this, but we weren't to this level. Like I don't think that not every other kid had a broken arm every the week. Like my mom was definitely more paranoid than the parents in this movie. Like, but they're not to this level nowadays.
well, after Michael was hit by a car, I'm sure that.
Yeah. Well, Michael had like a bad year where like I broke his arm with my butt. He got hit by a car and then had eye surgery to correct some things. And anyway, but
It was a rough time.
yeah.
It's all your fault, Michael.
I ruined the children of this age.
You're responsible for helicopter.
Anyway, but yeah. So what I was saying is we're like the last generation. I feel like that would play outside like every day, and that is such an annoying thing when people say like, oh, kids these days don't play outside. And it's like, well, yeah, because they've got really fun things to do now, But there is a sort of like sentimentality to like man, that's so charming. Like just the kids in the blocks they're all on their bikes and they're all being creative in the stupid games they're playing, and you were just tougher, and you're just, I don't know, I loved seeing this because it reminded me of kind of the way we grew up a little bit more. But again, what my dad said growing up, because like our parents were born in 1969, and so they were like kind of right as this movie's ending, like that's when they were born. But a lot of the stories they would talk about were the exact same. Like I remember my dad talking about how scared he was of like when they would do the drills of you get underneath your desk with the bombs and all that kind of stuff. And which I know in this movie the kid didn't really take that seriously, but just so many things my dad would tell us about growing up, and it was just like reminding me so much during this movie. So I definitely enjoyed it way more than I thought. And again, the visual style was way better than I feel like what the trailer showed, at least from what I remember. I only saw it once, but yeah, performances were great. Jack Black, like Joe said, I loved his subdued kind of performance, because there were even at times at the beginning where I was like, that is him, right?
Yeah,
like
that's
it's just
same.
he's not bombastic in this, and it was really, really cool. That might be it. I think that it's just very charming. I love the way they depicted siblings, like because
Yeah.
we're like, we've got like 3 sisters, Michael and I do, and so like growing up with them and like how that the different personalities and how I love. This wasn't the case with us, but I love how they're like, yeah, by the time I came around, they were kind of done with home videos and family pictures, and it's like he doesn't exist. That was so funny.
That was hilarious.
But even just the way the siblings interact with each other, nothing felt fake. Like it felt so real. And if like Joe was saying, I think Joe was saying it, or maybe Thomas was saying about how this was maybe his story of how he grew up, and that I would totally believe that, because everything in that whole like growing up phase felt very genuine, and yeah, I just I felt a bit of yearning for these simpler times, but anyway.
I like when they were in the arcade and he's talking about the older kids and how they would do
Yeah.
that trick to get an extra game, and I was like,
Yeah.
how did they do that?
He just like scrapes the button. Like I was like, what?
I also liked when they go to their grandma's and she's like telling them all these conspiracy theories, and the mom's like, "You have to stop. You're scary."
JFK is still alive in Florida or whatever. He's a vegetable.
I like a throwaway line where he's like, and this is when Jello molds were invented.
Yeah, I love that so much.
The mom is like so satisfied when she peels off the top. Like she's like, yes.
Oh,
And she
Yeah,
makes
so
like
good.
17 different meals out of ham. Like,
Yeah.
Those sandwiches look disgusting.
Oh,
I'm
I
sorry.
They looked rough.
I thought they look good. I like ham sandwiches.
Not frozen though.
But it even takes me back to God, that terrible, terrible sandwich meat that had the squares of cheese embedded
Oh,
in
yeah.
the
Oh,
meat,
yeah.
like a bologna. And I'm like,
That's
why did we
unfortunate.
ever get that? It was horrible.
'Cause it was
I
cheap.
remember going to their house and they're like, "You want a ham sandwich?" And I saw that and I was like, "I'm good." Like,
Oh man.
Man. And we could reminisce about this all the time
Yeah.
for another 2 hours, but we got to move on. So